Hi everyone! Today we're making a paper prototype to test the main mechanics of the paleontology game I'm developing, Marsozoic. So a prototype is a bare-bones, straightforward implementation of game mechanics you want to test, made as quickly and simply as possible. It allows you to answer some specific questions about your mechanics, a very common one being, is this mechanic I'm picturing in my head actually fun to play? And ideally, you can modify your prototype very quickly to iterate. You may have seen prototypes in behind-the-scenes documentaries about successful games. They're typically cobbled together from placeholder elements. They're really streamlined in order to test a specific thing. Incidentally, the GMTK channel just released a great video about prototyping, why it's so useful and how to do it effectively, so if you'd like more details on that concept, make sure to check that out. Now, in some cases, you can start testing some mechanics even faster by making a paper prototype. So as the name implies, you just take some paper and scissors and a pen, and you quickly throw together an abstracted version of the mechanic you want to test. You use pawns or little game pieces or whatever you have lying around to represent different game elements. You use dice for randomization. Essentially, you create a simple board game version of your game concept or your specific mechanic. And then you ask people to sit down and actually play it, with you, the designer, standing in for the computer, explaining the rules and the actions the players can take, and then making the game actually react to the players' actions. So depleting health points, handing players items, and so on and so forth. Here's an example from a game I actually worked on, Mario + Rabbids Kingdom Battle. This was the paper prototype the game designers made early on to test the tactical gameplay, and you can see it already implements the arena structure and the tactical grid, the cover obstacles. With this proto, they could quickly simulate and iterate on the combat gameplay before anyone had to write a single line of code. I actually remember playing this prototype in Milan. This photo here was made public in some interviews and behind the scenes, so it's really cool that I actually get to show it to you. So the obvious plus of a paper prototype is that it takes no coding or technical implementation to do. It's really fast and you can iterate on it super quickly. If you want to modify a game rule, you can just do that because you yourself act as the computer. You don't have to modify any code, you can even just change things during a playtest to test a new idea. Of course, not all types of gameplay or mechanics lend themselves equally well to paper prototyping. If you're making a skill-based precision platformer or a bullet hell game, for example, you may have some trouble trying to abstract that meaningfully in paper form. But I'm making a puzzle/deduction game, so that's probably the genre that translates best to paper. For the game design I'm envisioning, I can pretty much just print the puzzle elements and give the puzzle to the players as is. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do in order to test my puzzle mechanics, the skeleton assembly and the zoological deductions on how the alien creatures lived. They're meant to be the core of the game, and as such they're also the mechanics I'm most worried about. If you recall the video where I introduced the game concept, I mentioned two questions I'm anxious about regarding the deduction mechanics. Number one, is it actually fun? That's always a big one. Is it boring? Is it too scholarly, etc.? And number two, how hard should the game actually be? Because I think the deductions, as I'm currently envisioning them, may be way too difficult and confusing. But the only way to answer those two questions properly is through testing, and that's exactly what a prototype is for. So I want to paper prototype the entire lab deduction phase of the game. We're going to start with a skeleton assembly, because that's the bit I'm feeling a bit more confident about. I have some faith that putting a skeleton together like a puzzle will be quite fun for players and hopefully not too difficult. If you remember, this is the complete skeleton I modeled in the last video for a first prototype creature. Now for the paper proto, I could just print the silhouette of each of those bones on little bits of paper and give them to the player as a 2D puzzle, where they would just lay the pieces next to each other in the correct spots. That would be a quick and efficient way to simulate the in-game mechanic. But since we have a perfectly good 3D model right here and I happen to have a 3D printer at home, I got to thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I printed a model that testers can physically put together in 3D? And so I did exactly that. Here's the printer working away on some of the bones. Back when I modeled the skeleton, I wasn't at all thinking about 3D printing it, so the models are not optimized for printing at all. So I had to print it with a bunch of wasteful supports, which I then had to painstakingly remove. This is me working on that here. On the first attempt, I printed the pieces way too small. I figured the proto-skeleton didn't need to be very big and I could save a bit on filament, but the small pieces ended up being really fragile and finicky, the ribs especially. Here I am trying to glue broken ribs back together before deciding that this attempt was just a bust and reprinting the whole thing way bigger. So here I am now cleaning up the new version. Side note, while I do that, this kind of already goes against what I was just saying at the beginning, that typically you want to keep your paper proto really simple and make it really fast and easy to tweak. Making an elaborate 3D print does not really fit that brief, but I just got lured in by the fact that number one, the result would be really cool, and two, it would add a lot to the feel and the fantasy of the prototype for the testers. It would really emulate the desired feel of the video game more closely. So here I am going a bit overboard, polishing the pieces with a hot tool even, gluing some parts that were too big to print in one piece. Here's a super high-tech setup to give the tailbones a bit of a curve like I wanted. And then here we go, the entire tray of printed fossil pieces. I was really happy with those. Now it's time to make it possible to assemble them into an actual skeleton. So first I'm here marking the attachment points, which players will also be able to see in the video game. For the physical proto, my initial idea was to just draw them on with a marker, so testers would know where they were allowed to attach bones together, and then provide them with blue tack to actually put the thing together, like you see here. It worked okay, even if of course the blue tack assembly was a bit finicky, especially when you started to put many pieces together. I also drew on muscle scars, those red marks there. They're hints that will tell the players where important muscles attached and hint at what parts of the skeleton could move and how it could move. The assembled model wouldn't really stand up right on its own, and the blue tack assembly was pretty flimsy, so my partner found this nice piece of foam for me to use as a base. I carved these furrows into it, and voila, now it was possible to nicely slot the pieces in place and assemble the complete model from there. And then I was really pleased with that result, but there was still the issue that using blue tack to put the skeleton together was finicky. It wouldn't give testers a very good feeling, it made the assembly harder and a bit dodgy when I wanted it to ideally feel snappy and satisfying. That's when a close friend of mine visited. I showed her the model and she suggested that I use magnets for the attachment points, which was an amazing idea. If I could get that to work, it would give the assembly that exact snappiness I wanted. At this point I was really committed to this printed model, so what was a little extra work? I ordered some magnets and started supergluing them to all attachment points. Unfortunately, I don't work with magnets that often, and so I neglected to pay attention to their exact specifications, and that's how I ended up ordering magnets with a pull force over 1 kilogram each. That's way more than what's needed to hold this model together, and that caused them to constantly just fly everywhere towards every metal object while I was trying to glue them on. And unfortunately, my desk has a metal frame, and so anyways, it took over an hour, a hammer and acetone to get the little prick off my desk. But it was all worth it, because a few more magnet shenanigans later, there it was. It worked just like I wanted. Assembly is super snappy now. Maybe even a bit too much. And the magnets hold it together so well that you can even pick the whole model up. I'm really over the moon with that. It looks and feels very cool. So that was it for the skeleton assembly part. But the game mechanic I'm most worried about, and so the one I most want to test, is the deductions that I want players to be able to make from examining the skeleton. I want players to be able to look at the fossils and infer how the living creature moved and fed and perceived the world around it. I want that to be the core of the game, this Obra Dinn/Golden Idol inspired mechanic where you have this info sheet for each creature and you have to fill it in with words from the appropriate categories. So I started by creating this empty info sheet for our prototype creature, with a first idea of what I wanted the solution to look like, which words would need to be filled in to simply summarize how this creature lived. You can watch the entire design process for this creature in this video if you haven't already seen it. It goes over all the choices I made on how this creature would have lived and how I tried to design the creature's anatomy to make sense and hint at the solutions that players will need to fill in on this info sheet. Speaking of, the next order of business is to make a list of words available to the player, words they can actually slot into the info sheet. So I went and just wrote a bunch of words, ordered into colors by broad themes, like these words are environments, these words are about perception, these words are about movement, these words are body parts. Just like in the Golden Idol series, the colors should give players some directions as to what type of word they're supposed to slot in where. For this step, I tried to really just go for it, not being precious or second guessing too much, just jotting down every word I could think of that would make sense in a game about animals. And it was also an opportunity to go on a Wikipedia binge to get inspiration and think of more words. As a bonus, when you go on a Wikipedia binge like that, you discover absolutely incredible things that real animals do in nature. Like, forget about aliens, did you know there's a real spider that moves by just cartwheeling across the desert? Needless to say, I will have to use that as an inspiration for a creature at some point. Creating this word bank early on will also come in really handy when designing the next creatures. For the prototype creature, I kind of just started by imagining a creature concept from scratch, and now I'm trying to create the game materials and the info sheet solution in a way that will work for it. But I think going forward it will be much more effective to pick out words from the word bank first, kind of start by writing the info sheet solution and creating the creature to match that rather than the other way around. That'll make it much easier to modulate the difficulty of each creature as well, I think. So I want players to have access to reference documents and illustrations and just a bunch of materials in the lab that they can search through to actually find the words and information they need to make the correct paleontological/zoological deductions. Ideally, in the actual game, I'd want players to be able to literally pluck available words from documents to fill in the answers. So that means it was time to actually create a first version of this whole body of documentation that players would be able to actually look through. In Marsozoic, you're meant to be a paleontologist from Earth that just arrived on Mars to investigate these strange, newly unearthed Martian fossils. When you arrive, no one knows anything about these ancient creatures yet. You're the first one to investigate them. So my idea was that you brought all your books and documentation about how animals work on Earth, and you're hoping to use those to extrapolate how the Martian creatures may have lived. So some of your Earth knowledge may apply and some may not. And so I started making all these mock-ups of small books about biology, zoology, Martian geology. The idea being that these would be in the player's lab, always available to reference, and containing the hints the players need to identify certain features or draw certain conclusions. I basically made one small page per concept and tried to keep the text blurbs quite short but packed with hints and information. You can also see here how I pepper the text with words from the big word list. I highlight them with the appropriate color so the players know they can use those words to fill in the creature's info sheet. For illustrations here, I mostly pull from stock images available on Canva, or in some cases grab a few images from the internet to use as placeholders, because none of these images are meant to end up in the final video game, of course. Again, these are just quick mock-ups for prototyping, so the main goal is to quickly find something that efficiently illustrates what I need the player to understand in order to properly test the deduction mechanics. When I really needed something specific, I made some quick schematics with Inkscape, which was a cool opportunity to actually learn to use Inkscape. I was really impressed with how powerful and easy to use it was. I'll probably be using it a lot for this project. I also had way too much fun designing fake book covers and making up book titles and even finding dumb puns or obscure references for the fake author names. This is all very much in keeping with the theme of this video, which should really be titled Making a Way Too Elaborate Paper Prototype. None of this is necessary to test what I need to test. A proto, again, is meant to be really simple and quick. If you want to prototype something, do not get lost in the details like this. But what can you do? I had fun with it, and I figured it would make the paper proto a little bit more approachable and fun for the testers as well. As I was making those fake books, trying to really simplify and condense some geology and zoology concepts into those small blurbs, I started getting really worried, because this felt quite scholarly, like researching those real scientific concepts and then summarizing them for players to read. I started feeling really anxious that this was gonna be quite boring for players, that no one would actually enjoy looking through these for information, that the game was gonna feel like a job. But incidentally, around the time when I was working on this, someone left a super nice comment on one of my previous devlogs, where they said my analysis phase concept really reminded them of strange horticulture and strange antiquities. I was aware of those games, but I hadn't played them, and I hadn't actually considered them as a possible reference. So when I read that comment, I went and checked them out. And it turns out that was an amazing recommendation. It was exactly what I needed at that moment. Because in Strange Antiquities, the bulk of the gameplay is referencing books for information. Those books are formatted in a very similar way to what I was trying to do. Short blurbs with hints and keywords and some illustrations. And most importantly, it's super fun. Those games are great. Cross-referencing the books and making deductions based on the information you get from them feels really good. If you're interested in what I'm trying to make here, you should absolutely check them out, I think. For me, they came at just the right time to reassure me by proving that this kind of gameplay could work, that it could be super fun, and it also provides me with an amazing reference on how it can be done well. So thank you very, very much, Winged Danger Noodle, for the recommendation. So obviously making those books took a bunch of time because I needed to give the players the hints they needed to figure out the prototype creature, but of course I also needed to camouflage these hints in a sea of other information. So for example, the prototype creature uses echolocation, but I obviously couldn't just write the echolocation page and call it a day. I had to write pages about many other possible perception methods to not straight up give away the answer. It was a lot of upfront work to put in a paper proto, but the great news is none of that work is wasted. This is just the first version of actual game content. After I've printed them all, these books can just go straight into the actual digital version of the game, and I can iterate on their content from there. Around that time, I also created a spreadsheet that I think will become an absolutely central tool in designing the puzzles for this game. For each creature, it catalogs the desired infosheet solution, but most importantly, it lists all the hints available to the player to guide them towards that desired solution. This will hopefully make it super easy to see which parts of the solution have too few hints. If the hints are diverse and interesting enough, this document should essentially allow us to visualize all the creature puzzles at a glance and hopefully help us spot and fix design problems. From there, I only had a few extra documents to prepare. I created some imprints of the creature, which will be trace fossils that the players can find that will give them hints on what the creature looked like while alive. This one here will help the players figure out that the creature ate using tendrils. You get this imprint of the tendrils with leftovers of prey caught in them. You can also X-ray fossils in the lab, so I made those X-ray scans in Inkscape for the bones where it was relevant. I also created a mock-up map for an area of Mars, so I would be able to show players where they found each part of the skeleton. From that, with the help of the geology reference books, they should be able to figure out some things about what environment and what time the creature lived in. Finally, I prepared some general anatomy reference sheets just in case. I made this little cheat sheet with tips and reminders, and I also created this, a playtest feedback sheet. This should help me get some really useful data from the people who will be interacting with this paper proto. I made it really simple. People are meant to fill in this first page before they play the proto. It asks them about their relationship with a bunch of games that I'm using as reference for Marsozoic. So it asks whether they know those games, whether they've played them, whether they've liked them. Then it gives them a 2-sentence pitch for Marsozoic and it asks them for their very first reaction to the pitch. After they fill this page in, they'll play the prototype, and when they're done playing, either because they've solved the entire thing or just when they've had enough, they can fill in the second page, which asks them how much of the puzzle they managed to solve, how difficult they found it, and of course how fun they found each aspect. So it's just a very quick form, but it will give me really useful info to contextualize playtest results for different types of players. As a very basic example, if someone who just really hates puzzle games plays the proto and hates it, that's probably a bit less of a concern than if someone who absolutely loves all my references absolutely hates the prototype. And with that, I'd prepared all the parts and documents I needed. Now it was time for arts and crafts. I printed everything and then I cut and assembled all the bits and pieces. Here I am cutting up 1,000,000 words and preparing them with blue tack so players would be able to manipulate them. And more interestingly, here's how I assembled the little booklets. I was quite happy with the result. You can leaf through them really nicely and they look kind of cute. When all of that was done, finally, here it was. The complete Marsozoic paper proto, with its 3D skeleton to assemble, its documents to cross-reference, its info sheet to fill in, and a creature that should be solvable from start to finish. When put all together like this, it looks kind of cool. People kept telling me it looked like a board game, that made me happy. Now I'm really excited to have a bunch of people try it. Friends, family, colleagues from the games industry. I'll let you in on a secret. As I record this video, I've actually already had 3 people play it, and the results have been really interesting and have already inspired me to make some tweaks. But that's spoilers. I'll tell you all about that in the next videos, when I've also tested it on a few more people. Until then, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video interesting and that it maybe gave you some ideas on how to paper prototype your own project. I wish you all a lovely end of the year and happy holidays if you celebrate. See you next time.